Do Germans really go into a mixed sauna naked? Are Americans too uptight about nudity? And is Michelangelo's David statue porn? Let's talk about it. Hello, servus, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Feli. I'm originally from Munich, Germany, but I've been living here in Cincinnati, Ohio, on and off since 2016. Maybe you guys heard about it. About 2 months ago, a story that had to do with Michelangelo's David statue and a school in Florida made huge headlines all over the world. And it all goes back to the fact that David isn't wearing pants. Instead, he is, in fact, fully naked. And just a couple weeks ago, there was yet another controversy about the statue. This time in Glasgow, where an Italian restaurant wanted to put up an ad that featured a picture of David holding a slice of pizza. This was the poster they wanted to hang up in the subway, but the company that runs the ad spaces had, quote, modesty concerns, so the restaurant ended up adjusting the ad so that now only David's upper body is showing. He's still naked, of course, but I guess the big concern here was his genitals. And for me, this kind of made me think about this whole topic of nudity again and how nudity is perceived in different cultures. When we look at the US in comparison to Western Europe, for example, I know that many Americans think of this stereotype of the rampant Europeans who are running around naked all the time and are super liberal about anything sex-related, while Americans kind of have this image of being rather prude and uptight in this regard. But how much of these stereotypes is actually true? How is nudity handled in everyday life in Germany versus the US? And where do these differences come from? Let's take a closer look at that story about the David statue. Now, since this is kind of a controversial topic with lots of different media outlets reporting about it, I personally like to look up the story on Ground News so that I can get the full picture here. For this particular story, Ground News has evaluated over 150 different sources, and it gives me a really good overview of how the story has been covered across the political spectrum. In this case, the majority of articles come from news outlets in the center of the political spectrum, and the lowest coverage is coming from the political right. If you click through the different categories, you can see some differences in the headlines here. And you can also check out how the topic was covered internationally. It also shows me how factually accurate these news outlets usually are, and it gives me full transparency by showing me who they're owned by. Now, Ground News is the world's first news comparison platform. It was founded just a few years ago in 2018 by former NASA engineer Herlene Coir, and I feel like this is exactly what we need in today's world, where it's so easy to get trapped in our own filter bubble or echo chamber or whatever you want to call it, where we only hear stories from one point of view and only get exposed to perspectives that already line up with our own opinions. This happens a lot through social media, but also when people strictly rely on just one newspaper or one TV channel. To combat that, Ground News has this really cool feature called Blind Spot that shows you which stories you may have missed because they were disproportionately covered on one side of the political spectrum. By the way, Ground News has different editions depending on where you're located in the world. You can use it as an app on your phone or in your browser, and when you install the browser extension, it even provides you with information when you read news articles on other websites or on Facebook, Twitter, or Reddit. The overall mission of Ground News is to make the media landscape more transparent so that cooperative civil debate can become the norm in our society, which I think is an amazing goal. I've personally become a huge fan of the platform, so if you're looking for a better way to stay informed about current events around the world, I can only recommend that you check it out yourself. You can try it for free or subscribe to get full access to all features. And if you use my link ground.news/Feli, you'll even get a 30% discount on the Vantage plan, which is the one I have. So just use my link to retrieve that 30% discount for Ground News, and I'll also put the link in the info box below. So what exactly happened in Florida? From what we know, 6th grade students at the Tallahassee Classical School were shown pictures of Michelangelo's David statue in arts class, who, as we know, is depicted naked. The class also included references to Michelangelo's Creation of Adam painting, as well as Botticelli's Birth of Venus, which both also show some nudity. The school is still relatively young. It was founded in 2020, has about 400 students, and it's a Christian charter school, meaning that it's publicly funded and tuition-free, but it's run independently. So unlike regular public schools in the US, they don't follow the curriculum and rules of the local school district, which means that they're more flexible in how they run the school, and they can accommodate their students' needs more individually. They actually had a partnership with Hillsdale College in Michigan, which is a private Christian liberal arts college that provided the school with a curriculum. And that curriculum includes instruction about Renaissance art in 6th grade. So far, so good. Now, the school says they have a protocol of informing parents before teaching, quote, potentially controversial curriculum in case they wanted their child to skip that lesson. But this year, there was some kind of miscommunication apparently, and that notice ultimately was not sent out. As a result, 2 of the parents complained about not being informed about this, and 1 parent even called the lesson pornographic, which is a statement that made it into a lot of the headlines. Then at the end of March, the principal of the school, Hope Carrasquilla, who had been the principal for less than a year, was given an ultimatum by the school board to either resign or get fired. So she resigned, but according to her, she wasn't told what the reason for this was, but just assumed that it had to do with the whole David situation. The school later published a statement in which they said that there were 2 additional incidents that played a role here. Now, all of this happened in the midst of a nationwide debate about laws that regulate school curriculums and let parents chime in on what they do and don't want their kids to learn. One example being the Florida Parental Rights and Education Bill, also often referred to as the Don't Say Gay Bill, as it also bans classroom discussions about sexual orientation and gender identity up to grade 12 in Florida schools. The story got a lot of traction both within the US and internationally, but in other countries, it's mostly been met with incomprehension. Dario Nadella, the mayor of Florence, which is where the David statue is located, tweeted, "Mistaking art for pornography is just ridiculous." And he invited the principal to come to Florence. Cecilia Olberg, the director of the Galleria dell'Accademia, followed his lead and invited Carrasquilla, the school board, parents, and the student body to view the purity of the statue. She also said in an interview with Associated Press, "To think that David could be pornographic means truly not understanding the contents of the Bible, not understanding Western culture, and not understanding Renaissance art." The daily Italian newspaper Corriere della Sera even reported about this on the front page, and they featured a cartoon of David with his genitals covered by an image of Uncle Sam and the word shame. At least that's what Associated Press reported. Unfortunately, I couldn't find that cartoon, but I'm assuming it has to do with copyright issues. Now, in the aftermath of all of this, Hillsdale College ended up cutting ties with Tallahassee Classical School, and Carrasquilla actually ended up following all of those invitations and traveled to Florence to visit the David statue in person. She also said in an interview with NPR, "I made the assumption that the letter went out and I didn't follow up on it. It is my responsibility to make sure these things happen. But honestly, we did not have to send out a letter regarding Renaissance art." Which I would argue is a statement that a lot of people in Italy, Germany, and other European countries would agree with, and something that many people have been wondering about in the first place. Why do you even need to inform anyone about a harmless statue? I mean, speaking from my personal experience, a lot of Europeans have seen many of those statues in real life at a way younger age, and if anything, we'd kind of laugh and giggle about them as kids. But this is where the cultural differences come in. Nudity simply plays a different role in different cultures. Now, of course, I can only speak from a German perspective, but let's take a look at a few everyday situations and how this topic is handled in Germany compared to the US. Number 1, going to the sauna. I feel like this one is pretty well known, and people who move to Germany from abroad talk about it all the time. But yes, it is in fact normal, even more so required, to be fully naked when you go to a public sauna in Germany. And yes, those are usually mixed saunas, co-ed as Americans say. However, most saunas do allow you to wrap your towel around you, so you don't actually have to sit there fully exposed if you don't want to, but don't be surprised if some of the other visitors do. Now, I'm not actually a big fan of going to the sauna myself. Nelf would probably be the better expert here, but from what I know, this goes back to Finnish sauna culture. Supposedly, it's healthier and more sanitary to go to the sauna naked. But at the end of the day, it's up to whoever runs the sauna to make the rules, and there are some places in Germany that do allow visitors to wear a bathing suit as well. In the US, on the other hand, bathing suits are usually mandatory, nude saunas are super rare, and even with everyone wearing their bathing suit, they're still usually separated by gender. Number 2 ties right in with the previous topic because it's about the popularity of FKK in Germany, in English usually referred to as nudism or naturism. FKK stands for Freikörperkultur, so literally free body culture, and even though many people always assume that among all of the crazy Europeans, Germans would be the more conservative ones, Germany is actually the hotspot for FKK culture, together with France and Scandinavia. In the late 19th century, the first FKK association was founded in Essen, Germany. Then in 1920, the German island of Sylt opened the first official nude beach, and a little bit later, the nudist culture was booming in the GDR, so in East Germany. Now, of course, it's not like you'll just see naked people run all over German cities. Just like in the US, it's not usually permitted to be naked in public, but there are designated FKK areas at lakes, rivers, beaches, at public pools, and in many parks where people are allowed to hang out naked. And they do. And even though these are special designated areas, they're not usually hidden away somewhere with a visual barrier. So as a kid growing up in Munich, it was pretty common that when you went swimming in the summer or just went through the English Garden in Munich, you'd walk right past them. My parents always said something like, "Das sind die Nackerten," and for some reason, they always played volleyball. But all jokes aside, even though the majority of Germans prefer wearing clothes or at least a bathing suit, seeing naked people in public is pretty normal to us. It's also slowly becoming more socially accepted for women to be topless in areas where men are allowed to be topless. There were actually a couple court cases about that recently. It's also very common for little kids to run around naked in Germany, whether that's in their own yard, at the beach, or even in a park. Apparently that was a big thing for me as a kid. My parents tell me that I didn't really like wearing a bathing suit at the beach when I was little. So we have vacation photos from when I was like 4 when we were in Spain, and my parents and even my baby brother are posing for the camera fully dressed, and I'm just standing there completely naked, but I look like the happiest kid in the world. There's even a popular children's song from the 80s by Rolf Zukowski about this.
Naki die, alle sind heute Naki die, und keiner findet was dabei.
Now, of course, nude beaches do also exist in the US, but they're usually more tucked away from the rest, and you don't really have to worry about running into naked people in Central Park in New York, for example. Not usually, at least. Speaking of swimming and going to the pool, what's the situation like with communal showers that you might go to after the pool, at the gym, or if you play sports? Are they group showers or are there separate stalls? Do people get fully naked or wear a bathing suit? And are they co-ed or separated? Now, in Germany, I'd say it's pretty mixed. At public pools, they're usually open floor plan showers, but separated for men and women, and often a family shower as the third option. Some people get fully naked in those, others don't. Typically, it's the older people who are more likely to be naked, but they're not the only ones. I've also been to water parks, though, where they had single stalls for everyone. Now, I never played a team sport, but I know that for the most part, if you play a club sport in Germany, it's pretty common for the whole team to shower afterwards. My brother said that for him playing soccer growing up, when they were like 13, they'd still keep on their underwear or swim trunks in the shower, but the older they got, the more common it was for everyone to shower naked. Now, from what I've heard and read on the internet, it seems like in the US, depending on where you live and what type of school you went to, open communal showers can either be very common or not at all. I've read both extremes. Some people had communal showers in their college dorms, so they had to shower in those. Some said they've never had to shower with other people in their life. Let me know in the comments what your experience is with this. One story that I can share is that whenever I went to a music festival in Germany, like the ones where you camp for a few days, there was always one big shower tent, separated by gender, but then inside the tent there were no curtains or stalls or anything, so some people wore their bathing suits, some were naked, but it really didn't matter either way. The 2 times I've been to a music festival in the US, there were always single shower stalls, so my guess would be that the open plan communal showers are probably a little less common in the US. Number 4, the doctor's office. When you go to the gynecologist in the US, they usually give you a paper gown for you to wear and then leave the room so that you can get changed in private. And I'm pretty sure it's similar at other doctors where you have to get undressed, like at the urologist or dermatologist. Well, not in Germany. I remember when I was a teenager, they would always tell us to wear a dress or a long shirt if we felt nervous or uncomfortable about our first gynecologist appointment, because you're not gonna get anything else to wear. The doctor usually has a little changing stall in their office, like a curtain with a stool or something where you can get undressed and put your clothes, but they'll typically stay in the room as you do so, and if they're like my gynecologist, they'll even keep talking to you the whole time. And at most other doctors, if it comes to a situation where you have to get undressed, they don't even have a changing room for the most part. Every time I've done a full body skin exam at the dermatologist in Germany, I would kind of just get undressed right in front of them. A German friend of mine also told me that when she went to the dermatologist in the US, she almost felt like she was wasting her time because she said they weren't even looking everywhere. Number 5. Breastfeeding, one of the most natural things in the world. Now, this one is actually very interesting because it seems like breastfeeding in public is actually more socially accepted in the US than it is in Germany. According to this study from 2015, only 44% of German women found it perfectly natural to nurse babies in public, compared to 57% in the US. At the same time, I've seen YouTube videos where Americans will say something like this.
Another thing that was kind of shocking that would have totally been like a front page story in America was one time when I was in the beer garden in Regrovi Sadi, a woman was breastfeeding her child openly, and the kid was standing on the bench next to her on his own 2 feet, pausing between gulps to have a conversation, presumably, and she was just standing there bare-breasted for all to see. I don't find anything wrong with this, but in America, this is so controversial that they actually talk about this on the news, whether women should be allowed to breastfeed their children in public.
So which one is it? Is it accepted or controversial? In Germany, I'd say that for the most part, it's accepted and kind of ties in with her overall tolerance towards nudity, but there are always those 1 or 2 people that find it inappropriate for whatever reason, and there's a pretty controversial public debate about this in Germany, which is kind of odd for a country that has no problem with nudity in other situations. Fact is, Germany doesn't actually have any laws regulating this, neither in terms of protecting breastfeeding in public, nor restricting it. So if you want to breastfeed your baby at a restaurant, for example, it's up to the restaurant whether they allow that or not. Here in the US, however, all 50 states have laws that protect breastfeeding in public and private, and more than half even have laws about providing spaces to breastfeed in the workplace. At the same time, though, apparently those laws can overlap with public indecency laws, which sometimes leads to women getting in trouble for breastfeeding after all, like in this case in Georgia. When it comes to personal experience, the other day I saw a woman breastfeed while she was standing in line for the checkout at Kroger, and nobody seemed offended by it or said anything, so this one seems difficult to analyze. Maybe you can let me know about your experiences in the comments below. And last but not least, number 6, nudity in media. If you zap through German TV channels, even in the middle of the day, you'll notice that it's not uncommon to see a naked butt or boobs here and there. It's safe to say that German productions and media regulations are a lot more liberal in that regard, compared to the US, where even some episodes of Rick Steves' travel show couldn't be aired before 10 p.m. because you could sometimes see sculptures and paintings containing nudity in them. Rick Steves also has his very own story in regards to the David statue, by the way. He had the David on one of his book covers, but was told that they needed to add a fig leaf to cover up David's private parts because some bookstores in the US felt uncomfortable displaying it like that. And daytime talk shows on American TV have to beep out every single curse word.
I guess it would be pretty strong.
No. Or use fake curse words like fudge, which of course doesn't have anything to do with nudity per se, but it kind of ties in with the whole prudish image here. In Germany, you'll just see topless women in tabloid newspapers. The country's biggest newspaper, Bild, even had them on the cover page for the longest time. Pretty sexist if you ask me. They should show naked men as well. And you'll also see erotic magazines, such as Playboy, openly displayed at gas stations and supermarkets, usually right by the checkout. In the US, magazines like that are usually covered up somehow. In addition to that, and I've actually mentioned this one a few times, last time in the video about sex education with Sarah and Kevin, the German youth magazine Bravo, that many generations grew up with, had and still has a sexual education category where readers can send in their questions about love, relationships, friendships, puberty, sex, or whatever else they have questions about, and and a team of experts answers them in the magazine. This also included a category that was called That's Me, where they always had one nude photo of a guy and one of a girl in their teens. I believe they moved up the age limit over time, together with questions about what they liked and didn't like about their bodies, which was basically a way to support body positivity and reassure insecure teenagers that every body looks different and that that's okay and beautiful. And if we look at the digital media world, one example that comes to mind here is Instagram, run by the American tech company Meta, that has a super strict ban on showing female nipples. Those have to be censored, otherwise the picture gets deleted, while male nipples are totally fine, of course. Fun fact, or not so fun, depends, they actually have an artificial intelligence that scans whether a nipple is female or male. At the end of the day, whether we find these things normal or inappropriate comes down to how we were socialized. Now, of course, this is going to be different for every person and for every situation, but if we were to summarize it, I'd say that in Germany, nudity is just overall considered a rather normal and natural part of life, while in the US, nudity is often sexualized by default, even if the context of the situation isn't sexual at all. But where does that come from? How come that in two wealthy, democratic Western countries, these topics are treated so differently? Why is nudity such a taboo in the US? Now, that's a very complex question to answer, and we won't be able to fully solve that mystery in the remaining 5 minutes of this video, but I did stumble across a few different factors that might possibly play a role here. The number one reason that people bring up in this context is the Puritan history of the US that goes all the way back to the 1600s, when the first settlers from the Old World arrived here, many of them fleeing religious persecution. Pilgrims who founded the Plymouth colony were so-called separatists, for example, who separated from the Church of England, but there were also groups such as the Puritans who wanted to purify the church. They followed pretty strict rules that prohibited things like gambling, fancy clothing, smoking in public, living with Indians, missing Sunday services, celebrating Christmas, and of course things like sex outside of marriage, masturbation, homosexuality, and adultery, so cheating on your spouse. That one even had the death penalty. Now, there's one thing that I read quite a lot about in newspaper articles, blog posts, forums, etc., but I couldn't really find any scholarly sources for this, so please let me know if you know more about this. But it said that the Puritans also believed that all nudity outside of sex was evil, and a few articles even mentioned that they went as far as avoiding bathing as a result of this. Now, whether that last part is true or not, I don't know, but what's for sure is that religion seems to play a big role here. Some even mentioned that this goes back to the story of Adam and Eve and how their nudity is connected to sin. Now, after the settlers, the religious journey of the US continues through the First and Second Awakening, the rise of American evangelicalism, and eventually brings us to the 20th century, where after the so-called sexual revolution of the 1960s, purity culture started to gain in popularity in the 1990s. Purity culture includes young people promising to stay abstinent until marriage. There are purity rings and even purity balls where daughters make virginity pledges to their fathers. And even though purity culture has been declining, religion is still a topic that makes the United States stand out within the developed world. Because what we usually see is the poorer a country, the more religious its people. But the US is quite the exception here. Super wealthy country, and according to this survey from 2018, over 50% of Americans say that religion is very important in their lives. In Germany, this number is at only 10%. In Sweden and Norway, it's even lower. And I can confirm this from personal experience. I don't think I know anyone in Germany who actually goes to church every week, while I know quite a few people my age in the US who do. And another survey from 2014 about global morality shows that about 30% of Americans, so almost 1 in 3 people, believe that premarital sex is unacceptable, compared to 6% in Germany. And lining up with this, abstinence-only sex education is predominant in some parts of the country. Still, over 90% of Americans do engage in premarital sex, which as a result leads to a high number in teen pregnancies. But if you want to learn more about all of that, make sure to check out this video. And we see this reflected when we look at politics too. The whole political spectrum in the US is actually shifted to the right compared to politics in Europe. So the country overall is rather conservative in comparison. Now, another factor that might play a role, particularly in regards to my point of letting kids run around naked is that Americans seem to be more suspicious of strangers and more worried about crime. So for many Americans, the first thought that comes to mind when they hear kids being naked at the beach is child pornography, kidnapping, human trafficking, you name it, even if this doesn't line up with reality. In fact, this survey from 2014 shows that even when crime is statistically decreasing, like it had been for 20 years at the time of the survey, Americans were actually more afraid of crime and believed that it had increased. Now, these are probably just a few of many, many social factors that play a role in this cultural difference. Let me know in the comments why you think this is different in Germany and the US. What I find interesting is that even though I said at the beginning of the video that many Europeans think of the US as being prude, the country also has a reputation for sex being a pretty big part of pop culture. I mean, sex sells, right? And maybe even more so in a country where the human body and sexual desires have been declared the enemy. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to leave me a comment with your thoughts and opinions about all of this. And of course, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and activate the bell if you like these type of videos. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. You can hear me on my podcast. And if you want to support me, I do appreciate it. You can send me a super thanks here on YouTube, buy me a coffee, or join my Patreon community. I'm actually doing a Patreon live stream this weekend, so I'll either see you there or next time here on YouTube. Tschüss! Oh, and by the way, in case I didn't clarify this enough, the David statue is, of course, not porn. I repeat, not porn.